Hey guys, having trouble sleeping tonight again? You're not alone. Let's take a slow walk together into a world that's long gone, where beauty didn't just open doors, it also built cages. The flicker of candlelight, the soft rustle of linen skirts, and the whispered prayers behind stone walls. All part of a world where a woman's appearance could seal her fate before she ever spoke a word. You might envy their dresses or their long braids until you hear what those expectations cost them. Spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive this with your sanity intact. Don't forget to subscribe and share this channel with someone who loves soft bedtime stories. Tonight, let your mind drift along with us, and may this soothing story help you find the sweetest dreams. Drop into the comments and tell us where you're listening from, or even how you're feeling right now. Worried? Sleepy? Just curious. You're welcome here, exactly as you are. Rest your head, slow your thoughts, and together we'll step into a soothing place where dreams begin to bloom. So, you're a medieval woman, or maybe just trying to imagine being one tough gig either way. The first thing you learn, your value starts with your face, or more specifically what men think of your face. And that face, it better match the local fantasy. Now, beauty wasn't universal. What counted as pretty in 12th century France wasn't always the same as in 14th century Bohemia. But across the Christian medieval world, one thing remained constant: you weren't designing your own look. That was the job of theologians, painters, poets, and let's be honest, men in robes who hadn't touched a woman since birth. Pale skin. That meant you were noble, rich enough to stay indoors. Tanned arms, scandalous. You might as well confess to milking goats. Thin eyebrows, innocent. A round, unblemished forehead, divine. Big eyes and tiny lips were signs of piety, because apparently God liked his maidens looking like they'd seen a ghost and couldn't speak about it. Of course, this wasn't just casual preference. No, this was enforced idealism. Entire sermons were written about how a woman's looks reflected her soul. A beautiful woman with a crooked heart? Impossible. A plain woman with a pure spirit? Also unlikely. Sorry. Beauty, they preached, was both a gift and a sign from heaven if you were lucky, or from the devil if you were a little too good at eyeliner. Historians still argue whether these ideals were strictly followed by common folk or just dreamt up by courtly elites. After all, your average village girl had more pressing concerns, like not freezing to death or getting trampled by a pig. But even peasant women wrapped in wool and dust heard those whispers. The ballads sung in the fields didn't praise kindness or cleverness. They praised golden hair and lips like rose petals. Ironically, the very things that made a woman desirable could also make her dangerous. A flirtatious glance, temptation. A confident walk, pride. A woman with beauty and opinions. Clearly, she was up to no good. There's a famous tale of a lovely merchant's wife in Cologne who attracted so much attention that her husband locked her away in their home. He claimed it was to protect her honor. She later joined a convent. Whether to escape him or all of society is, well, still up for scholarly debate. And here's where the whole trap tightens. If you were pretty, men wanted you, but not too many. If you were too desired, you were suspicious. If you weren't desired at all, you were worthless. It was a razor-thin line between admired and accused. And yes, razor-thin brows were all the rage too. Go figure. Now imagine being 12 or 13 in age that by the standards of the day made you marriage material and already learning how to bat your lashes just so. Your mother whispers lessons by firelight, how to keep your chin low, how to smile with just your eyes, how to carry water without jiggling too much, all to please a man you've never met who might be twice your age and who probably thinks gentle courtship involves offering you half a cow and not throwing up at the altar. But even with the pressure, there were quiet acts of rebellion. Some women leaned into their beauty like armor. There's a story from southern France of a baker's daughter who wore ribbons in her shoes, bright, defiant, totally against church modesty laws. Every time a priest told her to stop, she added another bow. She became the subject of half the town's gossip and several rather terrible love poems. She never married. She didn't need to. She owned the bakery after her father died and passed it on to her niece, who also loved ribbons. And don't get us started on Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine. Intelligent, bold, politically brilliant, and also famously beautiful. Her looks made her a star, but her power made her dangerous. Rumors swirled that she bewitched 2 kings. Others claimed she was descended from Melusine, a mythical half-snake woman. Imagine that being so good-looking that people assume you're part serpent. Honestly flattering. So, you see, beauty in the Middle Ages wasn't soft or sweet. It was sharp. It could crown you or condemn you. It could build you a palace or get you burned at the stake. And no matter how careful you were, no matter how obedient your face was never entirely your own. And now, with your head resting softly on your pillow, you start to realize just how exhausting it must have been to live inside someone else's fantasy. You sigh, and the candle flickers low. You wake up at dawn in a drafty stone room with frost edging the shutters, and the first thing you worry about isn't hunger or the firewood count. It's your hair. Because if your hair isn't golden, you're already behind. In the medieval imagination, golden hair meant holiness, purity, and high birth, even if your bloodline was mostly sheep farmers and that one cousin who thinks he's descended from Charlemagne. Women bleached their hair using mixtures of saffron, quicklime, and sometimes, yes, fermented urine. And not just their own. You'd soak your hair in this pungent potion, sit out in the sun under a wide bonnet with the crown cut away to let the rays hit your scalp, and wait for hours. This was a beauty routine, and a punishment rolled into one. Historians still debate whether the average village girl really bothered with all that. After all, sun and soot already did strange things to hair over time. But noble women, oh, they went to war with their follicles. There's even record of a Venetian recipe involving black sulfur and pigeon droppings that allegedly gave your hair a radiant yellow glow, provided you didn't pass out from the fumes first. The kicker: once your hair was perfectly flaxen and shiny, you'd promptly hide it under layers of linen veils, crisp, wimples, and stiff hoods. Modesty, after all. But that didn't stop the art. Paintings, frescoes, and illuminated manuscripts often showed women with their hair cascading down their backs like golden rivers, even though no decent lady would appear that way in public. So your real audience wasn't the people you lived with. It was the men writing poems about women they'd never met. And teeth. Oh dear. You kept your mouth shut in portraits for a reason. Dental hygiene was, let's say, aspirational. By the time you were in your 20s, you were likely missing a few molars, and anything resembling toothpaste was probably made of ground shells and vinegar. That didn't stop the obsession with a cherry mouth, tiny red and presumably closed. The irony, medieval sugar was rare and expensive, so it was mostly the wealthy who rotted their teeth with candied fruits and sweetmeats. That noble woman with the polished ruby necklace. She probably had breath that could fell a goose. But as long as you were pretty from afar, you were winning. Of course, you didn't have access to mirrors like we do today. No bathroom selfies. Your reflection came from polished metal darkened water, or maybe a slab of glass if you were really rich. So imagine styling your face based on what you remember it looking like last Tuesday in a puddle. That smudge of berry juice on your cheek. You'll find out about it 6 hours from now when someone else points and laughs. And yet, the beauty pressure didn't pause at puberty. It accelerated. Girls as young as 12 were being sized up for marriage, their features appraised like livestock at a market. Strong hips an old baron might murmur approvingly. Good for bearing heirs. You'd smile and die a little inside. But let's not forget makeup. Yes, even medieval women wore it. A pale face was the ultimate canvas of nobility, and if your skin was naturally too tan, say from working outdoors like a human being, you'd be slathering on lead-based powder until you looked half dead. A touch of crimson on the cheeks and lips could be achieved with crushed berries, or for those who dared cochineal beetles. That's right, you were basically kissing bugs. And did we mention belladonna? Some women dripped this toxic plant into their eyes to dilate the pupils, creating a dough-like appearance. Side effects included blindness and death. But you looked mysterious while it lasted. Still don't think you were doing this alone. Beauty was a social event. Sisters, mothers, and friends helped each other twist braids, tie bodices, and mix potions. Gossip flowed like ale. Someone always knew a new trick to lighten hair or soften elbows. Rub with goose fat. Apply rose water, whisper a prayer to St. Agnes. But every trick carried a risk. You might look too radiant, too alluring. And suddenly, the whispers began. She's unnatural. She must be using enchantments. Did you see how Sir Benoit looked at her? Her father should be ashamed. In some villages, even wearing a ring of rosemary in your hair could draw suspicion. It was supposed to ward off evil. So why did you need it? What evil were you inviting? There's one tale probably exaggerated by time and wine of a young noblewoman whose beauty caused a knight to fall from his horse and break his leg. Rather than scold the clumsy rider, the townsfolk blamed her. She was forced to cut her hair, wear sackcloth, and live in seclusion for a year. Her only crime, being beautiful in the wrong moment. You begin to see it now, how beauty for a medieval woman was a trap dressed up in silk. You had to have it. You had to protect it. But if you flaunted it, if you dared to enjoy it, you became the threat. And yet, you still tried. You still crushed herbs in the quiet of morning, still traced lines on your cheeks with trembling fingers, still hoped that the reflection in the basin might smile back a little brighter today. Because somewhere inside, under all the layers of fear and caution, you believed what the poet said. That beauty might carry you away, lift you up, help you fly, or at least help you survive. You close your eyes thinking of yellow braids soaking in the sun of laughter, echoing through stone halls of beetle lips and blushes made from petals. And for a moment, the curse feels almost like a lullaby. It's another cloudy morning, and the hearth is barely warm. You're winding linen around your head with practiced fingers, layer after careful layer. Because even if your hair is golden and glowing, it must be hidden now, tucked under veils and folded cloth, like a secret you're not allowed to keep for yourself. This is the paradox of beauty in your world. The more you fit the ideal, the more you must disguise it. Enter the wimple, the veil, the barbette, the crespin, so many names for the wrapping of your womanhood into tidy, modest geometry. A woman's hair, you've been told, is the snare of the devil. Better to bind it away than risk catching souls in it. If men fall into lust, the fault lies with your exposed tendrils, not their wandering minds. And heaven forbid you walk bareheaded after Mass. But here's the strange part. All these coverings, all these rules, they made your beauty more dangerous, not less. Because when something is hidden, people start to imagine it. A glimpse of ear beneath the veil could ignite rumors. The flash of a neck at twilight might send a scribe's pen trembling. You are mystery incarnate, and that mystery is your curse. Historians still argue whether these veils were worn out of genuine piety or pure social pressure. Likely both. For noblewomen, a perfectly pinned headdress said, "I am virtuous and well married." For widows, it said, "I am dignified in grief." For nuns, it was practically armor. But for you, it's protection. Not from weather or cold, but from what people think when they see your face. And it's not just what you wear. It's how you move. Every step is measured. No swinging arms, no loud laughter, no skipping, no spinning for joy. That's for children. You're a woman now, and your body is a message. One wrong movement could be interpreted as flirtation or defiance. There's an old tale about a merchant's daughter in Ghent who was known for the way she walked smooth gliding like a swan. So elegant, it was said, she never kicked up mud. Men wrote verses about her footsteps. Women said she was proud, too proud. One jealous rival whispered that she walked that way because her soul didn't weigh her down. A witch's soul, they said, was hollow. She was found guilty of nothing except making people feel things they didn't understand. And so, you learn to curate your existence, to modulate your beauty like a candle flame, just enough to be seen, not enough to burn the room down. But not all women followed the script. Some reveled in illusion. Italian ladies drew blue veins on their skin to appear more translucent. German noblewomen shaped their eyebrows into thin, arched lines that curved like falcon wings. Spanish court ladies carried scented sachets not for freshness, but to leave a lingering trail behind them. These weren't accidents. They were weapons. There's a quirky tidbit from a 14th century French household manual that recommends rubbing the cheeks with warm red wine to produce a natural flush. The same guide advises not to smile too widely, lest your gums appear coarse. And your laugh, practice it. It should tinkle, never bray. You're not a mule. You're a miracle. But remember, if you laugh too often, someone will call you light. If you don't laugh at all, they'll call you cold. Medieval society, it turns out, had a spreadsheet in its head for every possible expression your face could make, and every cell in that spreadsheet led to judgment. So you cover yourself, and in doing so, you become a canvas, not for yourself, but for others. The priest imagines you penitent. The bard imagines you passionate. The lady next to you in the pew imagines you plotting. You walk through town like a floating idea, not a person. And underneath all that linen, you still want. You still wonder. You still glance at your reflection in the brass basin and try to find something true. You wonder if the veil makes you more holy or just invisible, Even the church, which tells you to cover your beauty, spends an awful lot of time talking about it. Saint Jerome once said that a woman who paints her face denies being made in God's image. Others said that true beauty lay in humility and self-denial. And yet, the Virgin Mary is always beautiful in the stained glass windows. The saints are always glowing. Even the paintings of Eve naked in the garden show her with perfect hair and delicate curves before shame, before sin. So where does that leave you? You are not Eve. You are not Mary. You are just you. Hungry, tired, and wondering whether the mole on your chin will make people think you consort with spirits. Still, you wrap your veil tighter. You pinch your cheeks before market. You walk slowly and keep your eyes lowered, not because you are afraid, but because you've learned that beauty must be fed in silence. And deep down, you know that under all these illusions, you still exist, still burn, still dream of days where you can walk freely without fear, where beauty is not a weapon, where a glimpse of your hair does not cost you your peace. Until then, you'll be the quiet flame under layers of ash. Soft, steady, waiting. You sit by the window, mending a tunic by candlelight, and outside the bells toll for vespers. The room smells of beeswax and damp wool. The air is quiet, but your thoughts are not. You wonder not for the first time if your beauty will protect you or betray you. In this world, you're not just a woman. You are either the woman, pure, saintly, soft-spoken, or you're the other woman, wild, unchaste, a whisper away from witchcraft. The line between them is thinner than a spindle's thread. You were warned early, don't be too pretty. Don't be too plain. Be docile. Be radiant, but not too radiant. Be quiet, but not suspiciously so. And above all, never let your beauty make others uncomfortable. That's the real crime. In medieval lore, women were constantly divided. The virgin or the whore, the angel or the temptress, the blessed or the bewitched. There was no room for nuance, no category for lively farm girl who likes to sing while she washes turnips, no space for clever widow with a kind smile and a bit of a crooked nose. Just extremes. The church played no small part in this. Preachers across Europe stood in pulpits quoting Paul and Augustine, warning that beauty was a gateway for sin, that even Eve, perfect beloved, led humanity to ruin, all because she wanted knowledge. And perhaps in the painted panels of her, she looks too beautiful while doing it. Historians still debate whether this duality was genuinely felt by all or mostly propagated through sermons and courtly songs. Either way, the message seeped in. Women bore the burden of spiritual temptation on behalf of everyone. You were told a man falls because he must. You fall because you chose to. Even queens weren't safe. Look at Isabeau of Bavaria, accused of vanity frivolity, even demonic influence. Much of it because she dared to wear daring gowns and expensive jewels while the kingdom teetered. Or Eleanor of Provence, admired for her learning and refinement, yet still branded a seductress when politics turned against her. The prettier you were, the more easily your enemies could make you monstrous. You've heard stories, perhaps, around the hearth, or whispered among the laundry lines, about women punished not for crimes, but for being noticed. A girl whose betrothed claimed she'd bewitched him. A widow accused of enchanting livestock with her siren's glance. A midwife burned because a village blamed her youthfulness on pacts with dark forces. Beauty was never just surface deep, it was dangerous if wielded without permission. and sometimes not even saints could escape the trap. Take Saint Wilgefortis. A medieval legend claimed she was a beautiful princess who prayed for deliverance from an unwanted marriage. Her prayer was answered. With a miraculous beard, her beauty vanished. The suitor fled. She was martyred, of course, but her story was whispered like a warning sometimes to be holy. You must become undesirable. There's a strange tidbit from a 13th century nun's journal that suggests some women prayed not for beauty, but for the opposite. Lord, spare me from the gaze of men. It's both funny and deeply sad to be so tired of being looked at that invisibility feels divine. And yet, in the same world, troubadours sang endlessly about the unattainable lady, her luminous skin, her swan-like neck, her slender fingers. These weren't descriptions of actual women. These were mythologies draped in silk. And if you happened to match one, people would believe your story had already been written. You were an ideal. And ideals don't get choices. So, what happens when your reality doesn't fit? Maybe you're clever. Maybe your humor is sharp, and your eyes even sharper. But no one listens if your chin isn't dainty enough. Maybe your beauty causes rifts between brothers, between knights, between the women who used to sit beside you at weaving. Maybe you're treated like treasure one moment, like trouble the next. The same men who praise you at feast will mutter at chapel about your presence being distracting. You once made a tunic that fit too well, and the Lord's steward said it was inviting. You stopped tailoring so carefully after that, but you still hear the rhyme the washerwomen sing. A fair face draws gold, a sharp tongue draws fire, but a woman too fair draws the gallows entire. Is it a joke? Maybe. But the laughter sounds uneasy, and so you step carefully through each day. You smile politely at the butcher, you nod modestly at the priest. You lower your eyes, just so, when passing men in the market. Not because you're ashamed, but because you've learned how little space beauty gives you. Yet, in the solitude of your thoughts, something stirs, a little defiance, a little glow that refuses to go out, because beauty might be a curse, but it is yours, not theirs, not the poets, not the preachers. You were born with it, you shape it, and you survive it. So you hold that candle of yourself steady in the wind, quiet, luminous, unbowed. The hearth crackles low as dusk falls again. You've pulled your shawl tighter. Your shoulders ache from the day's tasks, and your reflection in the basin shows the faintest line at the edge of your mouth. You trace it with your finger, wondering how long before others begin to notice. Because beauty in this world doesn't just weigh you down, it ages you faster. And once it's gone, the currency is spent. Tonight your thoughts drift to how often women were traded like coin, not for who they were, but for what they looked like. Beauty wasn't just decoration, it was a dowry, an investment, a means of acquisition. You weren't marrying into power, you were the power someone hoped to claim. Attractive daughters meant stronger alliances. Land, livestock, grain. These things moved when a lovely face entered negotiations, and behind every betrothal contract was the unspoken line, "She is fair, and her womb is presumed functional." Harsh, absolutely, but true. Historians have found accounts of noble families exaggerating a daughter's features in marriage talks. Eyes like morning sky, they'd write, skin like milk. And when the poor girl finally arrived at court, everyone tried not to notice the pock scars, or the limp, or the way she flinched when the groom approached. You weren't allowed to be nervous. You were meant to be grateful. A French count once sent back a bride after one look declaring her too common in the jaw. She was 15. He was 42. She died a nun. Meanwhile, portraits were sent across kingdoms' wood panels lacquered and gilded, showing idealized beauty, not actual likeness. That mole gone. That crooked eye vanished. Your image wasn't a representation, it was a suggestion. A diplomatic bluff in a silken dress. And if you were beautiful and rich, you were a prize worth fighting for. Quite literally. The War of the Roses was seeded in part by disputed marriages. Helen of Troy wasn't just a myth, she was a template. If men saw your face and wanted it, kingdoms could fall. Even outside royal circles, beauty was treated like a coin in the purse. In a Tuscan village, a local man once offered 3 goats and a half sack of barley for a miller's daughter, known for her cheerful chin. No word on what she thought of the transaction. Probably not much. The concept of courtly love, the idea that men worshipped from afar, penning verses and sighing in shadows, is often romanticized now. But in truth, it turned women into decorative saints, a pretty face to write about, not listen to. You weren't expected to respond, just to inspire, preferably from a window while the bard got drunk beneath it. There's a fringe tale from Occitania about a noblewoman who turned the tables. A poet courted her for years with songs and gifts. One day, she invited him to her chamber, only to recite his worst verses back to him, line by line, before slamming the door in his face. Legend says he cried for 7 days. Less romantic when the object of your passion has opinions, isn't it? But few women could afford such rebellion. A common girl with beauty and no dowry. You were a target. Men would flirt, flatter, promise. And when you refused, you were a tease, a witch, or worse, a woman who thought she had value. The nerve. And if you were married off your beauty, often disappeared into obligation. You became a wife, a mother, a housekeeper, but not a woman anymore. Not in the way you once were, and heaven forbid you stayed beautiful too long. If your husband grew jealous, your safety could vanish faster than the spring rains. Medieval law was often vague when it came to marital correction. A slap here, a shove there, it was said to keep a wife in line, especially if she dared to keep her charms after marriage, because beauty once owned had to be controlled. There's a tragic account in a 14th century English court roll. A man accused his wife of witchcraft, claiming her youthful looks were unnatural. She was 35. His second wife was 16. The trial found no magic, only bruises. Historians still debate whether these stories were exceptions or the rule. But the records are there, pressed into vellum and hidden in dusty archives. Stories of women accused, condemned, or discarded, not for what they did, but for what they looked like. And yet, even in the shadows of these tales, you see sparks of power. A widow who leveraged her reputation for favor at court. A merchant's wife who used her beauty to secure better trades. A tavern girl who flirted just enough to earn tips, then disappeared before anyone could follow. They knew the rules. They knew the risks. But they played anyway. Because sometimes beauty wasn't just a curse. Sometimes it was the only weapon left. And you hold that truth gently now like a glowing ember in the palm. You're tired, but you're not empty. You're aging, but not invisible. You've been used, admired, dismissed, and remembered. And still, you remain. The tunic is finished. The hearth is dying. and your face, still lovely, in its own quiet way, watches you from the basin. It winks, or maybe that's just the candlelight. It's early morning again, and you're sweeping the floor of the manor's solar when you hear the clink of spurs behind you. You don't turn. You've learned not to. Because in castles and courts, beauty isn't just admired, it's used, traded, displayed, and often dragged through the very mud it once seemed to rise above. You've seen it happen before. Noble women praised in one breath, then scorned in the next. At court, you are the muse, the ideal, the ornament, until you speak out of turn, or wear the wrong shade of red, or smile too long at the wrong man. And suddenly, you're not a lady anymore. You're a scandal. The term courtly love gets thrown around like rose petals, but it wasn't all sonnets and sighs. It was a dangerous game. A nobleman's love letter could elevate you or ruin you. A misplaced glance could lead to rumors that stuck tighter than lice. There's a well-documented case from the Burgundian court where a young noblewoman received a string of poetic letters from a baron, harmless enough until his wife intercepted one. The woman was dismissed from court within a week and married off to a widower in the countryside. Historians still argue whether the woman ever responded to the letters at all. And yet courtly beauty was an entire economy. Dresses sewn with imported silk and trimmed in gold. Gowns deliberately fashioned to show just a bit of shoulder or the swell of a sleeve. Perfumes made from crushed ambergris or deer musk harvested in the most unspeakable ways. Entire hours spent perfecting the look of effortless grace. But of course, none of it belonged to you. You didn't own the dress. It was your husband's property. You didn't own the perfume. It was gifted by a lord who wanted to smell it on you. Not for you. Even your hair, long brushed, perfumed, was expected to be revealed only at your husband's whim or your confessor's command. And if you were caught enjoying any of it, well, someone would say she always did think too highly of herself. There's a biting little anecdote from 15th century Naples where a court lady was said to have smiled too brightly at a visiting diplomat. Later, during a political rift, the king cited her improper lightness as one reason negotiations had soured. Imagine that international diplomacy undone by a pretty woman's grin. But sometimes, women at court leaned into it. They had to. If you were going to be talked about better, to be talked about strategically. There's the curious story of Agnes Sorel, official mistress of King Charles VII of France. She wore daring gowns with necklines so low that her breasts were practically declarations of war. She was called everything, from goddess to devil. But she wielded her beauty like a broadsword. Charles built her a palace. Enemies whispered poison into ears. Literally, she died at 28, and rumors of mercury poisoning never went away. You sit on the rush mat now thinking about these women praised, painted, gossiped over, sometimes mourned. Their beauty may have lifted them to the clouds, but it offered no parachute when the wind turned. Even outside court, the stories filtered down. Village girls would hear the ballads about Fair Isolde or clever Guinevere, or that maid with hair like wheat and the voice like honeyed mead. They'd sigh. They'd pluck at their own sleeves. Maybe they'd imagine a knight galloping by. Maybe they'd remember what happened to Marta, who smiled at the reeve and ended up with a bruised wrist and a ruined name. Because the curse of beauty wasn't just what others saw, it was how they acted because of it. Admiration could sour into obsession. Politeness could warp into possessiveness. And once men wanted you, it seemed they felt entitled to own you. There's a chilling entry in a minor nobleman's diary from the early 1300s. She looked at me again. Today, perhaps a sign. If she does not agree, I will speak to her father. That's the whole note. No name, just an assumption, just a girl reduced to a strategy. And even when you weren't being directly pursued, the scrutiny never stopped. Why does she wear that? Who is she trying to impress? She's too proud. She's hiding something. She's always alone, too strange to trust. Beauty could invite attention. Attention could invite suspicion. And suspicion, that could destroy you. You're probably thinking now, were there any safe places for a beautiful woman? Not many. But a few found sanctuary in books, letters, and quiet friendships. Some confided in older women who'd walked the same knife-edge years earlier. Some retreated to gardens, to embroidery hoops, to prayer. Some simply endured. But some became queens of their own little worlds. They learned to wield their looks like a chess piece, to maneuver attention into power. A lifted brow here, a softened tone there, a deliberate silence in just the right place. And while the world called them vain or scheming, they built spaces for themselves. Secret ones, strong ones. You stir the coals, watching the embers glow. You think of all the women whose names history forgot, but whose faces lingered in paintings, or whose likeness was carved into a cathedral corner, just out of sight, watching, enduring. You touch your own cheek. It's warm. Still yours. It's raining again. Outside the courtyard, stones shine slick with mud and fat drops splatter against the shutters like impatient fingers. Inside, the low rhythm of the storm feels almost like breathing. You sit near the fire, mending a tear in the hem of your shift, listening to the quiet drip from the eaves. Beauty in a storm you think fades fast, but it never really disappears, just hides. That's what you've come to understand about peasant women. Though the nobility wrote the songs and carved the statues, real beauty lived out here in the fields, on muddy paths beside steaming laundry tubs. And here, too, it came at a price. You might imagine that being born far from courts and castles meant freedom from judgment. But no, even in the smallest hamlets someone is always watching. A pretty face in a small village might as well be a torch in the dark. It draws attention. Sometimes admiration, sometimes gossip, sometimes worse. Peasant girls grew up fast. By 13, many were working beside their mothers, scrubbing, weaving, cooking, gathering. Sun-darkened arms and smoke-scented hair, calloused feet, bruised nails. Nothing like the women on holy cards or noble tapestries. But still, the men noticed. There's an odd little account from a 14th century Devonshire court record that tells of a shepherd's daughter fined for enticement by proximity. She walked past a married man's fence twice in one morning, apparently enough to stir trouble. The town elders didn't punish him, of course, just her, the implication that her beauty had wandered too close. Historians still argue whether such rulings were routine or exceptional. But these records exist in margins and rolls and faded ink. Women fined, warned, or whispered about, not for what they did, but for how they looked doing it. It wasn't always cruelty. Sometimes it was attention you didn't ask for. A wandering eye during church, a boy from the next village carving your initials into bark, a man lingering too long near the well, a merchant offering just a little too much for your basket of herbs. And then came the others, the wives, the older women, the ones who narrowed their eyes and drew their shawls closer when you walked past, not because they hated you, but because they feared what you might bring. Trouble mostly. In a world so tightly wound, any disruption, even one born of beauty, could unravel peace. Marriages were fragile. Reputations even more so. And if a woman's smile led a man to sin, well, it must have been her fault. That's how it went. So you learned to dim yourself. You wore plain colors, tied your hair back tight, looked at the ground more than the sky. You practiced walking like fog, barely there. And still, the glances came, the mutters, the quiet accusations. You remember a girl named Lise, don't you? Everyone said she had the loveliest voice in the valley, sweet as rain on lavender. When she sang at midsummer, even the grumpiest old man cracked a smile. But when the tanner's son got caught sneaking out at night, he blamed the way she laughed, said it confused him. By the next week, Lisa had vanished, sent to live with an aunt 2 towns away. Her father said it was for her safety. No one asked what from. And yet beauty gave you small victories too. A pot of milk when your cow went dry. A spindle gifted quietly, no strings attached. A stranger at the fair slipping you an apple and looking away before you could thank him. You learned to navigate this strange landscape of glances and silences, of favors and fears. It was a language all its own, one you never asked to learn but mastered anyway. There's a quirky tidbit from a 15th century rural German diary, an unnamed girl describing how she mixed soot and animal fat to darken her eyebrows to resemble the painted ladies of cloth. She wrote that the baker's boy stared too long and dropped a loaf. I felt like a witch and a queen at once, she scrawled. It frightened me and pleased me too. Isn't that just it? Your beauty wasn't just theirs to admire. It was yours to wrestle with, yours to use sometimes, to hide, to soften, to sharpen. And in the mud and fog and hard bread of your daily life, it could be the only thing that made you feel like more than just another pair of hands. Still the cost. A twisted ankle from rushing home too fast to avoid being followed. A ruined shift from the market boy who spilled wine on purpose. A mother's tight grip on your arm and the warning, don't smile so much, girl. Not with those teeth. And so you learn. Again. You learn how to disappear in plain sight. How to be pretty, just enough. How to keep your head down and your back straight and your secrets close. And in the dark of night, when the fire is nothing but a whisper and your body aches from a day's labor, you allow yourself one soft truth. You are beautiful, not because they said so, not because it got you bread or attention, but because in all this mud and frost and silence, you still are. You still glow, quietly, unapologetically. And in that glow, you sleep. The morning fog has settled thick over the village like a woolen blanket muffling every sound. You sit on the low bench by the hearth, your hands wrapped around a chipped cup of broth. The fire pops softly, and in that stillness, a memory surfaces of a man, once offering you a carved comb, his voice trembling, his eyes hungry. Beauty, you realize, doesn't just invite compliments, it invites devotion. And devotion in the medieval world could be the most dangerous thing of all. This was the age of amour, courtois, courtly love, and poetic obsession. Men composed songs so longing they practically bled ink. They whispered rhymes under balconies and tied ribbons to lances. On paper, it all seems rather sweet, romantic even, but you know better. Devotion unchecked becomes something else entirely. You've seen it in the eyes of a boy at chapel, staring too long during the benediction. In the way a steward lingered by the apple press, asking questions he already knew the answers to. In the gifts left anonymously, flowers, ribbons, a pair of kid leather gloves, always with the same message: I see you. I want you. That should be enough. Historians often debate whether this culture of romantic yearning was ever truly mutual. The poems are loud, yes, but the women's voices, nearly always absent. What did they feel? Were they flattered or afraid? There's a famous song by Guillaume de Machaut that describes a woman too radiant for the sun, who humbles all men by her gaze. He praises her endlessly, but buried in the lyrics is one haunting line: though she flee, I shall pursue. It's supposed to be poetic, but to you, it sounds like a warning. Beauty made women the subject of devotion, but not the owners of it. And sometimes that devotion turned feverish. There's a curious account from a 13th century French monastery where a young novice fell into a strange illness. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and mumbled constantly about a woman in town with eyes like holy relics. The monks declared it amor hieros love sickness, a medical condition, they said, caused by unfulfilled passion. Their treatment: bloodletting prayer and 3 weeks of confinement. The girl was never informed. Her beauty became a disease, and she didn't even know it. You sip your broth, it's gone tepid, but the warmth inside you is not. Because you know that in some corners of your world, you are a fantasy, people, invent, a symbol, a craving. They fall in love with the idea of you. Your braid, your silence, your sleeve drifting in the breeze, not the woman you truly are. There's a tale, half fact, half fable, of a noblewoman in Normandy who was so admired that a local knight took a vow of silence to prove his passion. For 6 years, he didn't speak a word. Finally, at a festival, he approached her with a carved token and uttered a single phrase: "You have made me holy." She married someone else the next spring. The knight became a monk. Was it love or obsession wrapped in incense and armor? You think of Marta again, your cousin who caught the eye of the Reeves' son. He followed her everywhere, left wild flowers at her door, watched her hang laundry, just watched. When she turned him down, he told the priest she was bewitching him. Within weeks, gossip had spread. Marta moved to another village, all because someone wanted her too much. And this is the curse, isn't it? When you are beautiful, you are told to cherish it, to be grateful. But when that beauty causes others to lose control, the blame falls on you. You led him on. You drew attention. You must have known what you were doing. But the truth is, you were just there, existing, with a smile that felt like yours, with a face you didn't ask for, with hair that caught the light one too many times. So you become careful. You smile less, speak less, dress down, fold in on yourself like parchment in a locked chest, not because you're ashamed, but because you've learned what happens when someone calls their obsession love, and the world believes them. There's an odd story about a woman in a port town who took to wearing soot on her cheeks to look plainer. The local boys called her mad, but they left her alone. She died with 3 goats, a clean bed, and no bruises. Maybe she wasn't mad. Maybe she was just brilliant. Still, not every woman dimmed her light. Some learned to use it. If men were going to adore you anyway, why not guide that attention? A whispered request here, a gentle refusal there, a patron won, a piece of bread earned, a delay at the tax table. You played the part of muse, but quietly rewrote the script. There's power in being adored, even when it's exhausting. But it's a lonely power, because the more people love the mask, the more invisible your face beneath it becomes. The fire has dimmed now. Outside, the rain has stopped, and you still wrapped in wool are left with a quiet understanding. Admiration is not affection. Attention is not care. And being wanted is not the same as being seen. But still, you sit upright. Your back is strong. Your beauty remains. Not untouched, not untarnished, but yours. And that is something no poem can claim. The wind howls through the shutters tonight. You can feel it in your bones, the kind of wind that makes dogs bark and candles flicker. You draw the wool blanket tighter around your shoulders, tuck your feet closer to the hearth, and think of the others like you, the women who are not beautiful, or rather the ones who are not seen as beautiful. Because in this medieval world, beauty is currency, and if you're not holding any, you're often invisible. Not plain, not ugly, just unnoticed. And that too is a kind of curse. You've known them your whole life, women with crooked teeth, freckled skin, or wide hips not fashionable for birthing. Women with big hands from work, sun-darkened cheeks from harvests. Strong, loud, funny kind, but rarely praised. In the village songs, they are never mentioned. The fair maiden is always slender. The noble woman always lily-white. The beloved always soft-spoken, meek and moon-like. These other women, they live in the margins of the story, and sometimes they write their own. Historians rarely speak of these women, but the evidence is there in letters, wills, and fragments. A baker's wife who left her tools to her apprentice because her husband never appreciated her dough. A nun who described her joy at finally being seen as a soul, not a shape. A midwife who, according to court records, delivered 37 children and was once accused of envy simply for not being pretty. Envy is the word people use when a woman refuses to disappear. You remember old Antha, didn't everyone? Her chin hairs could braid themselves and she wore clogs that clacked like hooves. But she laughed from her belly and roasted the best chestnuts in winter. Children followed her like ducklings. People called her a hag when they thought she wasn't listening. But they still came to her when they were sick. She wasn't beautiful by any court standards, but she was powerful. And that made some people uncomfortable, because beauty might win hearts. But usefulness wins respect. Still, the world doesn't reward usefulness the way it rewards loveliness. There are no poems written for women who stitch seams perfectly or cure fevers with willow bark. No statues raised to those who never married but kept 3 households running. These women go uncelebrated, and yet they hold the world together. You think of the mothers with tired backs and cracked nails, the sisters who stayed home while the prettier ones went to market, the friends who smiled while someone else received the compliments. Their beauty, the real kind, the kind that doesn't fade, is quiet, like a root, like a stone. There's a fringe tidbit from a 14th century Saxon manuscript where a man wrote, "My wife is not beautiful, but she is steady. The house does not burn when she is near." That's it. No grand metaphors, no honeyed praise, just steady. And isn't that lovelier than any rhyme? But of course, not everyone treated them with fairness. Plain women were often mocked, called bitter, dismissed, laughed at behind hands. If you didn't have beauty, you were expected to compensate with obedience, with labor, with silence. If you dared to speak up, you were jealous. Trouble, a reminder of what others feared becoming. And then came the real punishment, invisibility. You walk through the market and no one notices. You speak and no one listens. You offer an opinion and the men talk over you. Even other women sometimes avert their eyes as though your lack of beauty might be contagious. It's a quiet erasure. No torches, no shouting mobs, just 1,000 moments of being passed by. And yet, in the stillness, strength grows. You've seen it. In the way a woman like Tilda runs the mill house without once raising her voice. In the way she knows which child has been secretly fed by which neighbor. In the way her hands move without hesitation, even when her heart is broken. Because when the world stops watching you, you're free to watch it, to understand, to move carefully, to build things that last. And sometimes, invisibility becomes armor. A woman no longer regarded as beautiful walks safely through the dark. No wolf whistles, no lords leaning too close. She becomes a shadow among stones, and in that shadow, she finds peace. There's a record from a convent outside Pisa, where an older nun wrote in her journal, "I was not beautiful. I became wise instead." 10 words, a lifetime inside them. So tonight, as the fire dies low, you let your mind rest on this beauty, maybe a weapon. But plainness is a forge. It tempers, it strengthens, it humbles. And perhaps in a world obsessed with faces, there is power in becoming a presence instead. You shift your blanket, lean back against the wall, and for the first time in a while, you feel neither too much nor too little. You feel like yourself. The moon is out tonight, cold and round and sharp as a coin, and its light spills across the floor in a silver hush. You pause in your nightdress by the wooden table, a worn comb in hand, brushing your hair with slow, thoughtful strokes. You're thinking of the men who were supposed to renounce all things worldly. The monks, the scribes, the cloistered minds who copied scripture by day and warned of sinful women by night. And yet, even they couldn't quite look away. You may find it funny, or perhaps frustrating, that even in the silence of monastic life, women's beauty still crept in like ivy, through the cracks. Take a stroll through the margins of medieval manuscripts, those illuminated texts where devout monks painstakingly wrote the word of God. You'll find saints and dragons, yes, but also flirty rabbits, women with impossibly long hair, naked figures bathing in tiny gold tubs, tiny sketches of ladies lifting skirts or chasing knights. Some were moral lessons, they claimed. Others, not so much. Historians still argue whether these drawings were satire, mischief, or something deeper. A crack in the vow of chastity, a lonely longing, or maybe just proof that beauty, no matter how forbidden, could never be fully exiled. There's a curious tidbit from the margins of a 14th century psalter that shows a monk riding a snail next to a woman holding up a mirror. Some scholars say it's a metaphor for vanity. Others say it's a confession disguised in absurdity. Either way, you're left with the same conclusion. Beauty haunted even those who claimed to fear it. And if monks weren't sketching women, they were writing about them. Letters to abbots warning of local temptresses. Sermons describing the dangerous curve of a girl's smile. One even warned that a woman's laughter carries the devil's footstep. Imagine that. A chuckle becomes a sin. There's something almost comical about it. These men wrapped in wool and scripture, warning the world about female beauty, while clearly unable to stop thinking about it. You picture one sitting in the scriptorium, biting his quill, trying not to glance out the window where the washerwomen laugh in the river mist. But their fear had consequences, because they didn't just whisper warnings to one another, they preached them, and people listened. In the villages, in the towns, from high pulpits and traveling friars, the message echoed: a woman's face could bring ruin, her hair could tempt angels, her bare ankle, the downfall of nations. You laugh a little now quietly, of course, because yes, it's ridiculous, but it was also very real. Beauty became not just a blessing or a burden, but a liability, and women bore the weight of it every time they left the house, every time they attended Mass, every time they smiled. There's a case from Florence in 1421 where a woman was barred from taking communion for distracting the priest. Her crime: wearing a ribbon in her hair. No mention of the priest's lack of focus. Still, not every man of faith was blind to irony. There's a letter from a Benedictine monk named Theodoric, who wrote to his niece, "You are fair, yes, but beware, child. They will blame you for the thoughts they put in their own minds." A rare voice of clarity in a sea of accusation. You set the comb down. Now hair falling soft across your back, and stretch your feet before the fire. You think of the women who sought shelter in convents, not because they were pious, but because they were tired. Tired of being watched. Tired of being touched. Tired of being told they were too much, and yet somehow not enough. For some, the veil was escape. For others, a prison. Beauty followed them in either case. One nun, Sister Elodia, wrote in her diary, "They said, I gave up men, but no one asked if I ever had them to begin with. I gave up being seen. I do not miss it." Her words are scrawled faintly tucked between lines of Latin verse. And what of the monks who claimed to find peace in isolation? Some did, surely. But others in their loneliness invented entire stories about women they'd never met, wrote long confessions about dreams they couldn't shake, built fantasies in the margins while claiming they'd burned desire out of themselves. They feared beauty, not because it was dangerous, but because it reminded them they were still human. So tonight, as the wind softens and the fire dims, you think of the scribes and scholars and cloistered minds who tried to trap beauty between ink and prayer. They warned the world about you, wrote verses to warn each other, but in doing so, they preserved you, sketched your outline into history. They tried to erase the danger of your face, but all they really did was prove its power. The moon has passed its peak now, and the darkness has deepened. Outside, the wind has fallen still, and only the soft crack of embers reminds you time is moving at all. You sit quietly, spinning a bit of flax between your fingers, thinking of the strange entangled fates of beautiful women, especially those who were too beautiful. Because in the Middle Ages, loveliness could get you worshipped, but it could also get you tried. There's something frightening about being looked at and not believed, about being so pleasing to the eye that people assume you must be hiding something terrible underneath. You've seen it happen once, twice, more times than you care to count. That's how it always begins. She walks through the square, maybe with her head held too high. Maybe she turns down the wrong man. Maybe she heals a fever too quickly. Maybe someone's wife feels insecure. Whatever the spark, the fire spreads fast. And suddenly, the whispers begin. She's not natural. Too much color in her cheeks. Where did she get that dress? Have you seen the way men watch her? Historians still argue whether beauty itself ever led to formal accusations of witchcraft, or if it was merely a convenient excuse. But the records suggest this: the more you stood out, the more you were at risk. And beauty. It made you glow in the dark. There's a case from 15th century Bavaria where a woman named Greta, known for her golden hair and strange calmness, was accused of causing her neighbor's hens to stop laying eggs. No proof, no evidence, just the uneasy feeling that she was too serene, too composed, too lovely. She was drowned in the river by a village vote. Even in less extreme cases, beauty could land you in court for far more subtle crimes, adultery, seduction, blasphemy. Sometimes you didn't even need to do anything. Just being attractive and unavailable was enough. There's a strange little trial from northern France in which a widow was accused of misleading the community with her eyes. The phrase is vague, but the implication was clear. She looked at people in ways they didn't understand, and that was threatening. She was fined and exiled. Her eyes did not testify, and the fear didn't end with accusations. Even among friends, beauty brought danger. Jealousy festered in kitchens and fields, in spinning rooms and marketplaces. You learned quickly, too many compliments in one place could breed resentment in another. So you downplayed it. You wore duller colors. You tied your hair back. You stopped smiling so broadly. You grew quiet, but not invisible. They still saw you. And sometimes that was the most dangerous part. There's a documented tale from an Italian village where a woman was described as charming, obedient, and very fair, yet still accused of using herbs to bend the hearts of men. She defended herself. Her records survive. Her recipes, too, lavender, honey, clove. Nothing sinister. Still, her house was burned down. The people said it smelled too sweet. The odd thing is these stories weren't always tragic in the same way. Some women survived. Some turned their trials into transformations. One bohemian woman accused of love charms claimed her skills openly. She began selling them instead of hiding them. The town hated her, but they paid her, because sometimes fear and fascination walked the same road. You've learned the signs now. The way someone smiles with too many teeth. The way a group of boys lowers their voices as you pass. The way women clutch their rosaries harder when you enter the church. You know when to be silent, when to nod, when to vanish, and when to strike. Because beauty is not always passive. There were women who used their appearance like a blade, who wore red when others wore gray, who walked slowly so every step became a statement, who used the rumors as armor. One Spanish tale tells of a healer named Isabel who painted her lips crimson with crushed berries, not to entice, but to unsettle. She said it helped her speak more clearly. They think it's blood, she told her apprentice. Let them. And even now, in the low light of your quiet room, you imagine doing the same. What if you stopped hiding? What if you met their gazes instead of lowering yours? What if you smiled at the priest not with shame, but with the certainty that your mouth is your own? It's a bold thought, a dangerous one, but also a beautiful one. And perhaps that is the true heart of the curse. Not that beauty invites harm, but that it invites judgment. It makes people wonder whether you deserve the face you wear. And in wondering, they begin to fear you. You place the flax aside and stand to close the shutters. The wind has risen again, cool and whispering through the gaps in the wood. You latch them gently, knowing there are always eyes seen and unseen watching. But tonight, you don't mind, because the shadows may stretch long and the rumors may travel far. But you remain, a woman, a witness, a quiet fire. No accusation can extinguish. The shutters creak softly as the wind returns, moaning like a distant chant. You lie on your straw mattress, half covered in wool, the faint glow of the hearth still pulsing across the floor like a second heartbeat. And just before sleep finds you, your mind drifts back to the little things, the tricks, the rituals, the strange whispered customs women passed between them like secrets folded into sleeves. Because in the world you've inherited, beauty doesn't just happen. It's cultivated with tools, with prayer, and with some very questionable ingredients. Tonight, you remember the little pouch tucked behind your washing stones. Inside, dried rose petals, a bit of powdered chalk, and yes, one crushed snail shell. A recipe you learned from your grandmother who claimed it brightened the face without offense to God. You never questioned it. You just used it when you needed to feel a little more seen. It's funny the things women have done to feel beautiful, and how often those things walked the line between medicine and madness. Medieval beauty recipes were as creative as they were horrifying. Mix goose fat with mashed peas and honey for smoother skin. Boil frog legs in milk to treat freckles. Apply the ashes of bees to lighten the sole's surface. Crushed pearls, powdered bone lead oxide vinegar rinses, urine soaks. If it could be smeared, soaked, or burned, someone had tried it. And let's not forget the infamous Venetian ceruse, a lead-based white paste that made noble women's faces glow like pale candles and poisoned them slowly in return. Historians still argue whether these recipes were common practice or the eccentricities of courtly life. But the scraps survive. Notes in the margins of herbals, instructions scribbled beside prayers, lists of ingredients hidden inside dowry chests, women whispering to each other across continents and centuries. This worked for me. Try it. Of course not. All beauty work was skin deep. Hair had its own codes. You could sleep with a carved wooden comb beneath your pillow to keep curls from tangling, assuming you had the kind of hair that curled at all. A girl with straight, dark hair might rub crushed walnut shells into her scalp to darken it further, since lighter hair was prized in many regions. Or she might bleach it with a mixture so foul the house had to be aired for days. One woman's glamour was another woman's gas attack. Even posture was curated. Young girls were taught to walk with books balanced on their heads, not for reading, but for elegance. To sit with knees touching and hands folded as if the wrong arrangement of limbs might spell moral collapse. There's a quirky tidbit from a 15th century etiquette book that suggests women practice their smile in the mirror each morning, lest it become too generous and thus provoke longing. Imagine greeting the world with your regulated smile, just warm enough to say you're human, but cool enough to say you're not available. And then there were charms, little tokens meant to enhance beauty, worn close to the body near the skin. A polished moonstone sewn into a hem, a ribbon blessed at midsummer, a tiny silver mirror hung inside a bodice to deflect the gaze of envy. These weren't cosmetics. These were spells, rituals of defense and transformation. You remember your friend Anne, don't you? She once swore that rubbing the first morning dew on her cheeks would keep her complexion clear. You'd find her barefoot at dawn, standing in the garden like a ghost. It didn't work, but she was lovely anyway. And even when the practices failed, and let's be honest, they often did, there was power in the attempt, in the effort, in the reclaiming. Because in a world where beauty was often a threat, these rituals were a way to make it yours. Yes, they told you to look a certain way, but with every petal crushed and every paste stirred, you were doing something quietly radical. You were crafting yourself, not in rebellion, not in submission, but in agency. Even if the choices were narrow, even if the tools were crude, you were choosing. That mattered. It still does. So, tonight, as your fingers rub a bit of rose oil onto your temples, because it calms you, not because anyone will see, you remember that not all armor is metal. Some of it is floral, homemade, whispered. Beauty may have been weaponized, but the rituals, those were yours. And even if no one ever thanks you for it, even if your efforts fade by morning, the truth remains. You touched your own face with care. You tried. And there's something endlessly beautiful in that. The sky is still dark when you wake again, stirred by a distant bell tolling matins. You sit up slowly, rubbing sleep from your eyes, and for a moment, you forget what day it is. But then the aches return, the stiffness in your knees, the tenderness behind your ribs, and you remember you're not 16 anymore. And neither is your face. You've watched the change in the mirror's edge and water's reflection, in the way others look or stop looking. Lines that weren't there last season. A softness under the chin. A silver thread in the braid you once took so much pride in. Once your beauty turned heads. Now it turns to memory. And in this world, memory is not enough. Aging for a medieval woman was not just a biological shift. It was a social migration from visible to invisible, from praised to pitied, from temptation to cautionary tale. Your fading face becomes a lesson others learn from, a warning whispered behind hands. See how she used to be. There's no shame in getting older, of course, but in your time, there's fear. Because beauty was the coin you traded for safety, attention, influence, and now the purse is nearly empty. Your world doesn't hold much space for older women, unless they're saints or sinners or mothers, so utterly selfless they forget their own names. If you're not holy or helpful, you'd best be quiet. That's the rule. And if you don't follow it, well, you know what they call you then. Historians often debate the social roles of older women in medieval communities. Some became respected midwives, herbalists, or household managers. Others found security in cloisters. But for many, especially those who remained unmarried or childless, aging meant suspicion. There's a court record from Yorkshire describing a widow accused of whispering to the wind and curdling cream. No witnesses, just the sense that she lived alone, that she once was pretty, and now was not. The transformation from maiden to mother to hag was faster than most realized. And beauty, once your gift, became your threat. Because a woman who had once held power, even soft, silent power through her face, was feared, when that power could no longer be contained or controlled. Think of the way villagers look at you now, not with longing, not with praise, but with calculation. What can she offer? What does she know? Why is she still here? A young girl is loved for her promise. An old woman is tolerated for her past, but you are still you. You still feel, you still dream, and you still remember. The rush of heat when someone glanced at you a second too long. The soft thrill of silk against your skin. The way laughter felt on a summer evening when your hair was fresh washed and loose, and you didn't yet know the price of attention. Those things are yours, no matter what they say. You recall a woman named Bruna, don't you? She lived at the edge of the forest and kept to herself. White hair like snowmelt, wrinkles as fine as embroidery. The children called her a witch. But when they scraped knees or woke with fever, she was the one mothers ran to. She had no children of her own, no husband, just jars of herbs and eyes that had seen too much. She used to say, "Beauty is what leaves you when you stop caring what they think." You didn't understand it then. You do now. Because even as age moves through, you gentle but certain, you found something steadier than beauty. You found rhythm, stillness, knowing. You've learned when to speak and when to hold your tongue. You've discovered the joy of not being watched, the freedom of walking through the square without speculation. You dress how you like now. You braid your hair, or don't. You wear your oldest apron because it's soft at the waist, and if your hands are rough, well, they've built more than some men ever did. There's a quiet rebellion in continuing. In taking up space, no one gave you permission for, in being older and female and unbothered. Sometimes, you look at the younger women in town, faces polished and eyes darting, always wondering who sees them. You want to tell them what's coming. You want to say, you don't need to earn your place with your face, but you don't, because they wouldn't hear it yet. They have to find their own way, just as you did. So tonight, you sit with your back straight and your feet warm, and you listen to the wind shift outside. You are not young, but you are not gone. You are not watched, but you are watching. And there's a certain kind of beauty in that too. Not the kind sung in ballads, not the kind painted in gilded margins, but the kind that lingers, that holds, the kind no one can take. The fire has burned low again, but the coals are still glowing, a steady pulse in the belly of the hearth. You shift your weight on the bench and exhale slowly. Tonight, there is no laughter in the courtyard, no footsteps beyond the shutter, just the hush of late hours and the weight of knowing. You think now of the women who withdrew entirely, the ones who tired of being judged, chased, praised, punished, simply stepped away. The nuns, the cloistered, the veiled. To be cloistered was for some a calling, for others an escape. You enter the stone walls not because you hate the world, but because you're done being seen by it. In the convent, your beauty no longer matters, at least in theory. No men to charm, no dresses to impress, no eyes to avoid. Just wool habits prayer and the steady rhythm of bells marking the hours. But you know it wasn't always so clean. Beauty found its way into convents too. The church tried to ignore it, tried to veil it, but even among sisters comparisons were whispered in the laundry room. Sister Clara's lashes are so long. Have you seen the curve of Sister Etta's mouth when she sings, "You may hide your hair, but it still grows. You may bind your waist, but your shape still shifts beneath the robes." Historians still debate how much autonomy medieval nuns had in shaping their environments, but the letters survive quiet, careful notes between sisters, describing perfumes made of crushed violets and clove, recipes for soothing balms, and yes, sometimes even longing. One nun in Avignon confessed in her journal, "I miss the gaze, even though it frightened me, because being seen, even dangerously, is still being acknowledged. You think of Hildegard of Bingen, the famed abbess, who composed music, studied medicine, and painted visions of divine fire. She was brilliant, revered, but even she wrote of women's beauty, its magnetism, its spiritual risks, its creative power. A flame, she called it, holy when guided, wild when neglected. And wasn't that always the balance between wild and guided, between the beauty that lifts and the beauty that dooms? In the village, in the castle, in the convent, it was all the same. Be beautiful, but don't enjoy being beautiful. Be admired, but not too much. Be graceful, but not proud. Be seen, but not remembered too vividly. There's a strange little document from a monastery in Wales where the abbot banned mirrors. For vanity, he wrote, but the sisters protested, not because they wanted to admire themselves, but because they needed to see themselves. To scrub a face without seeing it is to lose something of yourself. The mirror returned a month later. Even in the quiet of religious life, a woman must negotiate her reflection. Some cloistered women wrote of their past beauty as a burden shed. One described her youth as a fire I had no tools to contain. Now, she said, my prayers are my reflection. But you wonder, was that peace or just resignation? Even the saints were not safe from beauty's weight. Saint Agnes, Saint Catherine, Saint Lucy, all described in legend as lovely beyond words. Their beauty made them holy and also made them victims, pursued by kings, desired by heathens, often martyred for saying no. Their bodies were carved in ivory and gold, their faces painted to perfection on chapel ceilings. Beauty once again rendered in worship, but not in safety. You think now of the woman who simply vanished, not into a convent, not into a marriage, but into the woods. There are stories, though, they blur into legend. A woman named Ellen, who lived in a forest glade near a ruined tower. No husband, no priest, just her goats and her dog in a garden thick with herbs. People said she was strange, that her skin glowed in moonlight, that men who tried to follow her trail got lost and came back changed. Was she real? Maybe. But what matters is this: she chose not to be seen, and in doing so, she reclaimed something deeper than beauty. She claimed privacy, sovereignty, silence without shame. And perhaps that's the answer to all of it. You don't have to run. You don't have to hide. But you also don't have to perform. You can sit in your own presence like a queen in a crumbling throne room, unworried, unbothered, unbowed. Tonight, the wind stirs again. You rise to bolt the door. Your reflection moves beside you in the darkened glass, and you nod to her, not with judgment, not with longing, but with understanding. Because your face has weathered it all. The praise, the scorn, the fear, the desire. It has been a weapon, a charm, a map, a story. And it is still yours. It's the final stretch of night now. That in-between hour when the world feels like it's paused before the roosters crow, before feet shuffle through the straw, before the sky begins to pale with morning. You lie still beneath your blanket, listening to the fire's final sighs, and your mind drifts through all the faces you've worn. The young girl learning to smile without showing too many teeth. The teenager adjusting her veil, wondering if she looked too eager. The bride wondering if her hair was too dark. The mother catching her reflection in a basin and not recognizing it. The older woman half forgotten but never fully erased. Because beauty, you've learned, is not a fixed thing. It's a story that changes every time someone else tries to tell it. And for medieval women, that story was often written in someone else's ink. The priest's sermon, the nobleman's poem, the court's accusation, the stranger's stare. Your body became a public scroll, read judged, praised, rewritten, while you stood silently by, trying to remember where your own voice had gone. And yet, you were never only a symbol. You were also a person, with thoughts, with fears, with 1,000 small joys the world forgot to write down. Like the thrill of slipping out barefoot into the first snowfall, or the soft ache of your braid at the end of the day, or the way candlelight dances on the rim of your cup, the smell of clean linen, the taste of plums warm from the sun. These were your beauty rituals too, not the ones in herbals or confessionals, but the ones that reminded you you were alive, that your skin held you not just everyone else's expectations. Historians may study your portraits, comment on your fashions, speculate on your motives. But they'll never truly see what beauty meant in the quiet spaces in the mirror after tears, in the hand on your own chest, in the courage to keep walking through a world that both worshipped and wounded you for how you looked. And now, as your eyes grow heavier, you realize the curse was never in the beauty itself. The curse was in being told it didn't belong to you, that your face was public property, that your smile was a promise, that your silence was consent. But even within that tight little prison, you found cracks of light. You made choices. You made yourself. And now, after all the seasons, after all the looks and the judgments and the long, watchful silences, you are still here. You've learned that beauty is not just something others see in you. It is also something you see in the world, in the way leaves cling to branches, in the curve of a sleeping child's cheek, in the softness of your own breath rising and falling in the dark. You are no longer trying to be seen. You are learning to see. And that, perhaps, is the last gift. You turn on your side. The room hums with stillness. You are no longer the girl they painted in the poem. You are not the danger. You are not the prize. You are not the ruin. You are the witness, the keeper, the flame. And finally, you are allowed to rest. And now, as our journey closes and the last embers of the story begin to fade, let your body grow heavy with calm. You've traveled a long road tonight, not through forests or battlefields, but through something deeper. The soft, invisible world of being seen, misunderstood, admired, and forgotten. The wind outside has quieted. The night has done its work. And here you are, wrapped in warmth and reflection, no longer needing to perform, no longer caught in anyone's story but your own. Let your breath slow. Let your muscles soften. Let your thoughts drift like petals down a quiet stream. There's no gaze upon you now, no judgment, no poem or sermon or stare, just the hush of your own presence. And that is enough. You are not what others have said about you. You are not the shape they tried to sculpt. You are not the silence they mistook for agreement. You are still and real and whole. So rest now gently. Let the echoes of the past melt into dream. Let your face, your own true face, be unguarded, unpolished, unafraid. Sleep is waiting. Peace is near. And in this quiet moment where no one else speaks but your own slow heart, you are more than beautiful. You are free.